The police officer looked at me, then at the woman who had called him, then slowly back at me. "Ma'am," he said, choosing his words the way you choose your footing on ice, "do you have any documentation proving you have a right to be behind that counter?" I reached into my bag without a word, pulled out a single laminated card, and set it on the glass display case between us. The color drained from the woman's face so completely it was like watching milk spill in reverse. But to understand how I ended up standing in my own store while a stranger tried to have me dragged out of it, you have to go back 3 weeks, to a Tuesday morning in October when everything unraveled, and then, slowly, came back together harder and sharper than before. I had owned Maison Delacroix for 3 years by that point. 3 years of 5:30 alarm clocks, vendor negotiations over bad coffee, payroll calculations on Sunday nights with a legal pad, and a sinking feeling in my chest. The boutique was my entire world, and I had built it with a precision that bordered on obsession. We carried contemporary women's fashion, mostly small independent designers, a few European labels that hadn't yet made it to mainstream retail, and a rotating jewelry collection I'd personally sourced from artisans I met at trade shows in Atlanta and New York. Every item in that store had passed through my hands. Every price tag reflected a decision I had made. Every inch of that floor was mine. The space was something I was quietly, privately proud of, in a way I almost never let myself say out loud. Warm walnut shelving, soft lighting that cast everything in a kind of permanent golden hour, a narrow marble counter near the entrance where my assistant Priya kept a small vase of eucalyptus that smelled like the idea of calm. I had painted the exterior a deep forest green that made the gold lettering of Maison Delacroix pop against the old brick facade. People photographed it constantly, tagged us on Instagram, called us the most beautiful shop on Meridian Avenue. I had worked for that beauty. I had paid for it. Every single molecule of it belonged to me. My name is Simone Delacroix. I was 34 that October, and I had spent the previous decade climbing from a junior buyer position at a mid-sized department store to the owner of exactly the kind of boutique I used to press my nose against the glass of when I was a little girl. My mother had been a seamstress. My grandmother had spent 40 years sewing other people's clothes in the back room of a shop that had her name nowhere on the door. I thought about those women sometimes when I unlocked the front entrance in the mornings. I felt their hands in mine when I turned the key. That Tuesday I'd come in early. Priya wasn't due until 10, and I wanted to arrange the new fall arrivals before we opened. I was alone, wearing dark jeans and a cream silk blouse from one of our vendors. Nothing announcing. Nothing that read, "I own this place," just the kind of thing I wore when I wanted to feel like myself. My hair was natural that day, pulled back loosely at the nape of my neck. I remember that detail specifically because it became relevant later. Everything became relevant later. I'd been at the store for perhaps 40 minutes when the front bell chimed. We weren't open for another hour, but I'd left the door unlocked because our new display fixtures were being delivered that morning, and I needed to be accessible for the crew. I looked up from the rack I was sorting and saw a woman let herself in. She was perhaps 55, blonde, dressed in white athleisure that communicated both considerable wealth and an alarming amount of unscheduled time. She moved her gaze around the store with the unhurried survey of someone who had never once questioned her right to be anywhere. I gave her a warm smile. "Good morning. We're not quite open yet, but feel free to look around. I'm happy to help if you see something you love." She glanced at me with the briefest flicker of something, not hostility, not quite, and returned her attention to the rack near the door without responding. I went back to what I was doing. There was nothing alarming about her being there. Customers wandered in before opening all the time, and we never turned them away. I moved toward the stockroom to bring out another box of new arrivals, and when I came back she was standing at the glass jewelry case near the entrance. I set the box on the marble counter and began unwrapping tissue-papered pieces. "That tourmaline pendant is from a designer based in Charleston," I said, nodding toward the piece she was studying. "She only does about 50 pieces a season. That's one of 3 we have left." The woman looked at me. Her eyes moved over my face, then to my hands, then to the pendant I was holding. When she spoke, her voice was flat enough to pass as neutral, but aimed like something with an edge. "Are you supposed to be back there?" I went still. "I'm sorry?" "Behind the counter," she said. "Do you work here?" "I come in regularly, and I don't recognize you." There it was, that specific register of voice, polished enough on its surface to offer itself plausible deniability, but precise in its implication. I had heard that voice before, in other stores, other rooms, other versions of this same exhausted scene. The assumption that I was somewhere I did not belong, that my presence in my own space required a defense I hadn't been asked to prepare. I set the pendant down carefully on the velvet tray. I met her eyes. "I own this store," I said. "Not with heat, not with cold. Just the fact, placed plainly between us like the pendant on the velvet." She stared at me. Something moved through her expression. And it was not embarrassment, which would have been the human response. It was something harder, a recalibration, the look of someone who had received data that contradicted their model of the world and was deciding, quietly and with dangerous calm, what to do with it. "Well," she said, drawing out the word until it felt like a verdict, "then you won't mind if I take my time." She turned away from the counter and moved toward the back of the store, toward the fall arrivals I had just brought out. I watched her lift a jacket from the rack by its sleeve, examine it without interest, and hang it back slightly off its hanger. She picked up a small ceramic bowl from the accessories table, a piece I had sourced from a potter in Asheville, priced at $140, irreplaceable, turned it over, and set it down with a small, deliberate click. Something told me not to leave the floor. I don't know if it was instinct or experience or the particular quiet alarm that goes off inside a person after years of navigating exactly this kind of energy. I stayed visible, moving between tasks, keeping her in my peripheral vision without making it theatrical. Priya wasn't coming in for another 90 minutes. The delivery crew still hadn't buzzed. It was just the 2 of us in the store, with the eucalyptus hanging in the warm air and the traffic beginning to build outside on Meridian. I was folding a cashmere knit near the front window when I heard her voice change pitch. She had moved to the far corner of the store, and she was speaking quietly into her phone. Too quietly, shoulders curved slightly inward, body angled away from me. I told myself she was calling a friend about one of the pieces. Customers did that all the time. "What do you think of this blouse? Should I get it?" Normal. Ordinary. The kind of thing that happened in boutiques every single day. She hung up. She turned and looked at me across the length of the store, and the expression on her face was not the expression of a woman who had just described a jacket to her girlfriend. It was composed, settled, the expression of someone who had set something into motion and was now simply waiting for it to arrive. I didn't understand what I was looking at. I would understand in approximately 7 minutes, when the bell above the door chimed, and 2 police officers walked into Maison de la Croix. The first officer was young, mid-20s, cautious in the way that people are cautious when they sense they've walked into something they cannot yet read. The second was older, with a short gray beard and the particular posture of a man who had seen enough of humanity's worst impulses to have developed a personal policy of suspended judgment. They scanned the store the way officers do, cataloging exits and positions and the relative temperature of the room. And then the older one looked at the woman in white athleisure and said, "Ma'am, you reported a disturbance?" "I reported a suspicious individual," she said, and the word individual landed with surgical precision on the air. She's been behind that counter for some time, and she can't verify that she's authorized to be there. I was concerned she might be attempting to steal merchandise. The older officer looked at me. His expression was unreadable, but it was unreadable in the way of someone making an active effort to hold it neutral. "Ma'am," he said, turning to me, "do you have any documentation proving you have a right to be behind that counter?" This was the moment. I felt the silence stretch around it, the way silence stretches when something is being decided that cannot be undecided. My hands were entirely still. I wasn't shaking. Somewhere in the 3 years I'd spent running this business through a global pandemic, through a flooded stockroom, through a vendor who disappeared with a $40,000 deposit, somewhere in all of that, I had used up my supply of uncontrolled reactions. I reached into my bag without a word and pulled out my business owner identification card, the one I kept laminated in the front pocket alongside my driver's license. I set it on the glass display case between us. The officer picked it up, read it, set it back down. His partner looked at it over his shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then the older officer turned to the woman in white, and his voice, while still professionally even, had taken on a new quality. "Ma'am, this woman is Simone Delacroix. This is her establishment." The color left her face in stages. It wasn't sudden, it was a slow recession, like a tide pulling back from a shoreline. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Well, I couldn't have known that," she said, and the confidence in her voice had not disappeared entirely, but had developed a small, telling fracture in it. She wasn't wearing a name tag. She didn't identify herself. "I told you I owned this store," I said. I kept my voice at the same temperature as the marble counter between us. "Those were my first words to you." She looked at me, and for just a fraction of a second, before the composure sealed back over it like ice over water, I saw what was underneath. Not shame, not remorse, something narrower and meaner than either of those things. Irritation at having been caught being exactly what she was. The younger officer was already stepping back toward the door, angling his body with the specific energy of someone trying to remove themselves from a situation that is rapidly clarifying into something they do not want to be part of. The older one stayed where he was. He looked at me with something that was not quite an apology, but contained the architecture of one. "I'm sorry for the interruption, Miss Delacroix," he said. "Is there anything else you need from us?" "I'll need both of your badge numbers," I said, "and I'd like a copy of the incident report." A pause. "Please." The woman in white picked up her bag from the chair near the door where she'd set it. She moved toward the exit with a speed that was trying very hard not to look like flight, and not entirely succeeding. I watched her go. The bell above the door chimed. The door swung shut, and I was alone in my store with the warm smell of eucalyptus and the distant sound of Meridian Avenue coming to life outside, and my hands were still perfectly still on the marble counter, and something inside me had gone very quiet and very cold. I called my attorney that afternoon. Her name was Dana Reeves, and she had been my business lawyer since year one. A sharp woman with close-cropped hair and a habit of writing on yellow legal pads in handwriting so small it looked like a different language. I told her what had happened. I heard her write something. Then she said, "Tell me you have security footage." I told her I had 6 cameras, all operational, all cloud-backed. I heard her write something else. "Good," she said. "Don't touch anything. I'll be there in an hour." Dana reviewed the footage with the focused quiet of a person who is building something in her mind as she watches. When it was over, she sat back in the chair, my chair, behind my counter, and folded her hands on the marble. "She called 911 on you," she said. "It wasn't a question. In your own store, after you identified yourself as the owner. And the responding officers, instead of verifying your identity first and asking what the emergency was, came in and demanded documentation from you in front of her." She looked at me. "Simone, this is a civil rights case. I had known it before she said it. I had felt it settle into place the moment I watched that woman walk out of my store without a single word of apology. But hearing Dana say it out loud made it real in a different way, made it into a thing with weight and shape and forward motion. Dana filed the suit 3 days later. The complaint named the woman. Her name was Carolyn Fitch, and it turned out she lived 12 minutes away in a neighborhood that cost money to get into, on grounds including racial discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation. The complaint was specific and detailed. It had the footage, timestamps, the officer badge numbers, the incident report I'd requested, and 4 witness statements from pedestrians who had paused on the sidewalk outside when they saw the officers enter and had seen the whole scene through the glass facade of my beautiful store. The local news ran the story on day 5. By day 8, it had migrated to national outlets. The footage was 17 minutes long, and once a journalist wrote about it, the clip circulated in the way that things circulate now, rapidly, globally, with the kind of velocity that ordinary news simply doesn't achieve. Within 72 hours of the story breaking, Carolyn Fitch had been identified, photographed, and her full professional and social profile had been assembled and published by 3 separate media outlets. She sat on the board of a non-profit. She was a member of 2 philanthropic organizations whose names I recognized. Both organizations issued statements within 48 hours. Both distanced carefully, in the language of institutions trying to manage exposure. One asked for her resignation. One did not have to ask because she resigned first. I watched all of it from my store, which was now doing approximately 3 times its normal foot traffic. People came in with the specific energy of solidarity purchases. They would stand at the jewelry case or the accessories table, find something, and hand me their cards with an expression that was part commerce and part statement. I appreciated all of it. I thanked each person sincerely. I also barely slept for 2 weeks. The night before the mediation session, Dana had recommended we attempt a structured settlement before proceeding to trial. I sat at the small desk in the back office of Maison Delacroix until after midnight. The store was dark except for the lamp on the desk and the glow of the security monitors in the corner. I had a glass of water that I kept meaning to drink. The eucalyptus in Priya's vase had dried out a little, and it smelled not like calm anymore, but like something old and enduring and faintly botanical. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her sitting in the back of someone else's shop for 40 years, her name on nothing, her skill in every stitch. I thought about my mother, pressing an iron over fabric on Sunday mornings with the precise repetitive motion of someone who had long since stopped expecting Sundays to feel like anything other than preparation for Monday. I thought about the little girl I had been, pressing her face against a glass shop window, thinking, someday. Not asking if, saying someday. I thought about Carolyn Fitch standing in my store, picking up the Asheville Potter's Bowl and setting it down with that small, deliberate click. And something inside me did not rage at that memory. It simply observed it, calmly, the way you observe evidence. It was evidence of a specific assumption she had carried into my space, that my presence there was provisional, that I was someone who could be removed if the right call was made to the right number, that the space I had built with my own money and my own hands and my own sleepless years was not in some foundational sense mine. She was wrong, and she was going to learn exactly how wrong in a room with lawyers present. The mediation lasted 4 hours. I sat across the table from Carolyn Fitch for the first time since the morning she'd walked into my store and looked through me. She was dressed more somberly now. Dark blazer, no jewelry, the careful wardrobe of someone who has been coached on optics. She did not look at me directly for the first 30 minutes. Dana laid out the damages claim methodically, item by item. Emotional distress, Reputational harm to the business in the period before the media coverage turned supportive. Legal fees, the cost of the additional security consultation I'd engaged afterward. The number on the table was $960,000. Carolyn Fitch's attorney tried 3 angles. Dana closed each one in the specific quiet way she had of closing things, not dramatically, not with volume, just with the next piece of evidence placed precisely on the table. When Carolyn's attorney suggested that his client had acted in good faith based on what she observed, Dana played 43 seconds of the security footage on her laptop. The footage showed the exact moment I said, clearly and audibly, "I own this store." It showed Carolyn Fitch's face processing that information. It showed the decision she made anyway. The attorney looked at the screen. He wrote something on his pad. He conferred with Carolyn in a low voice for 90 seconds. Then he sat back and said, "My client is prepared to discuss settlement terms." At the end of the 4 hours, Carolyn Fitch signed a document, and the number on that document was $960,000. She also signed a public statement of apology. Dana had insisted on it, and I had insisted on the specific language. It was not boilerplate. It named the discrimination explicitly. It acknowledged that I had identified myself as the store's owner before she placed the call, and that she had placed it anyway. It acknowledged harm. Her attorney had tried to soften 3 separate phrases, and each time Donna had looked at me, and I had looked at the draft and said, quietly, "No." The final version was the version I had written. Priya cried when I told her. She was sitting at the marble counter with a matcha latte she'd brought from the place down the block. And when I said the number, she set the cup down and pressed both hands over her mouth and made a sound that was not quite speech and not quite not. I handed her a tissue. She used it. Then she looked at me with her eyes still wet and said, "What are you going to do with it?" And I thought about it for a moment, actually thought about it, and said, "I'm buying the building." I closed on the building 4 months later. It was a Tuesday, which felt appropriate. I signed the paperwork in Dana's office with a black pen that she handed me like a ceremony, and when it was done, I drove back to Meridian Avenue and stood on the sidewalk outside the deep green facade of Maison Delacroix and looked at it for a long time in the cold November light. My building now, my foundation, my walls, my gold lettering, my Asheville potter's bowl on the accessories table inside, my eucalyptus in the entrance vase, all the way down. A woman stopped next to me on the sidewalk, a stranger, mid-20s, with the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone who was new to the neighborhood. She looked at the facade. "Is this store good?" she asked. I looked at her. I felt something warm and unhurried move through my chest. "Yes," I said. "It's mine." I unlocked the front door and walked into my own store. The eucalyptus smelled like calm again. The morning light came through the windows and turned everything gold. I hung up my coat, moved behind the counter, and opened for the day,